Can you go to, during the course of the presentation, do put questions up in the chat and just let us know who you are so that we can call you to speak when the time comes. And we've got about 50 minutes, so I'll not use any more of that time. But we are recording and you're very welcome, and thank you for turning up. Pippa.
Well, I think this talk is very timely in view of the newly agreed Ocean Protection Treaty. And I can't think why in the course of this 2.5 years we haven't had a talk on marine conservation before. So we're absolutely delighted to welcome Abby Crosby, and you will have seen from your invitation that she's a very busy lady. She leads on a number of projects with the Wildlife Trust Living Seas team, and she's also a founder and manager of the Your Shore network. So thank you very much for joining us, Abby, and it's nice to see you.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And I hope if this is one of the first sort of talks on marine, you know, I am summarising something in 45 minutes. If there are areas that really interest you or things we need to expand on, please say. It may not be me that does it, but I can direct you to other speakers, because especially in Cornwall, the sea is so big and important and just fantastic in Cornwall, isn't it? And it's a big part of who we are and what we are. And it's a life support machine for us all in the UK, not just in Cornwall. So it's really, really important stuff. And I'm really delighted to be here. So as the introduction says, I'm a Marine Conservation Officer at Cornwall Wildlife Trust. I've been with the charity a long time. I've been at the Wildlife Trust for nearly 16 years. And in that time, I've worked on a variety of projects, from strandings of dead animals, and you may have seen bits about avian flu in the press last week, to fisheries, to marine protected areas. So I have a very good broad knowledge of our Southwest ecology, of the pressures upon that ecology, but also across the UK and the conservation issues that are facing our marine and coastal environment. But I'm going to speak to you today. I've been invited to speak about a very specific and current topic. And it's a very current topic in our policies as a wildlife trust, but also, of course, in our national policies. And that is considering the marine environment and the climate change, or the way I'm approaching it is nature recovery and its role in tackling climate change. So I'm speaking for around 30 odd minutes, and there will be time for questions at the end. I do like to just quickly, flag that I'm with the Wildlife Trust. If we were in the room, I'd be like, could you put your hands up if you know about the Wildlife Trust? And it's always interesting to see the response. We in Cornwall are one of 47 wildlife trusts across the UK. That's why I love the Wildlife Trusts. We are regional, we know our communities, we know our ecology, we know what the local stuff happening, but we have this power across the UK of the Wildlife Trusts, of which David Attenborough is our president. And we can work across on a national scale as well in that way. But across the nation, we have lots and lots of lovely members, as this slide tells you. We're quite well recognised as a lot of environmental NGOs for our wildlife reserves, and we've got some fabulous wildlife reserves in Cornwall, from the Lizard Windmill Farm to Kennel Vale, of course, quite famous sites, to very small sites that have got particular ecological interest. We've got lots of staff that work here. We're a medium-sized business. We've got around 120 members of staff at Cornwall Wildlife Trust, both in our head office and in regional offices across the county. But the big figure at the bottom of that slide are our 40,000 active volunteers. Everything we do, like a lot of charities, we depend upon people and volunteers to deliver our work, to be part of our work, to make it meaningful. And that's a huge part of what we do. And Cornwall Wildlife Trust, I think, is one of the best charities I've ever known. And I really mean that. I work alongside this county's experts in ecology and conservation. And thank goodness we do what we do alongside other brilliant NGOs. We work very closely with people like the RSPB and the National Trust and so on. But we know that nature is in trouble. It's kind of masked by our amazing landscapes and seascapes, but we've we produced a Cornwall State of Nature report, which I really recommend you read. If you Google it, you'll find it. And our nature is in trouble, and there are some really worrying statistics. And we know that because David Attenborough obviously was talking about it in that recent Wild Isle programme, that we still have got work to do. We've got to do something about it. But with, and thanks to our supporters and partners, we, the Trust, are working towards a wilder future. And that paragraph there states it. It's our vision, a future where wild places are protected, where more land, rivers and seas are managed really well, where wild habitats are connected across our landscapes and seascapes so that our wildlife can roam and flourish, and where ultimately, and this is the reason I love working for the Wildlife Trust, where people connect with and take action to support our vital natural world. So we are working towards a Cornwall where nature thrives. And I've already mentioned our nature reserve, but we do a lot of work now, with people who are landowners, the farmers, the fishers, the sea users, and work with them about looking at solutions or methods that we can all work together towards protecting our lands and sea. We do run lots of projects. We run specific projects on land and sea to protect perhaps rare and threatened species. We host the County Record Centre. That's incredibly important for you to know. If you need access to data, whether you're a scientist or you're a developer, a consultant, we have millions of biological records that you can access and use to make those conservation and management decisions. And of course, as I've said already, we empower communities in all that we do. And, as I started tonight's talk, the sea is a big part of that. It's a big part of it for Cornwall Wildlife Trust, but it's also a big part of our National Wildlife Trust. Even inland wildlife trusts have living seas ambassadors. They have people that, look at ways in which they can flag and highlight the importance of our sea and our coast in our lives. And that's our Living Seas vision. It's very similar to our Wildlife Trust statement, isn't it? Where wildlife will thrive again, not just survive. It needs to thrive. We need recovery. We need to do better, where it can recover from those past declines, where it can adapt again. That's where we're referring back to working with landowners. We're looking at landscape, seascape scales, not just in little patches of nature reserve. We need to look big, and that people care throughout all of that. So we have lots of work going on, and in all of that work, we fundamentally create that awareness, because obviously so many people still don't get how the value that, the health of our environment impacts their lives, and we still need to create that awareness. We need to continue to campaign for better protection for the sea. It is behind the way land is managed, even with all the fantastic stuff that's gone on with the Marine and Coastal Access Act in the last 10 years, even with all the sort of references to the marine environment in recent policy. We still need to do better, and we still need to campaign to push that and keep it as a priority. And everything we do, we collect data and evidence to use to inform what we say and what we do. And we have lots of projects. We are one of the busiest wildlife trusts in the country, Cornwall Wildlife Trusts, and we're really proud of that. We're a small core team of 3 of us, myself, Ruth and Matt, but we also have project staff that work on specific projects. And whether it's sustainable fisheries, whether you're a scuba diver and you can be part of the subtidal survey team, whether it's looking at all those dead dolphins and seals that sadly wash up around our coastline, whatever it is, we are generally running a project looking at it. So we're very proud of our diverse programme of marine conservation activity. But let nature help. Thinking about why I'm here tonight, we're thinking tonight about marine solutions to the climate and ecological emergency. As I've said already this evening, we all know what amazing marine life we have around our Cornish shores. And if you don't, follow us on social media, because you'll keep seeing posts about it. But the sad truth is the UK still remains one of the most nature depleted countries in the world, which is pretty shocking, and including here in Cornwall, where, as I said before, our land and sea kind of masks what's really going on behind the scenes. And most of you on tonight's talk will be aware of the many threats that our wildlife faces: our deteriorating water quality, which is a big topic, the impacts of large-scale fisheries, to the biggie, and that is, of course, climate change. And Climate change has been a bit of an elephant in the room for many, many years. We've known it's happening. We've all known it's happening, particularly in our profession, as you can imagine. But sometimes it's almost been too big to know where to start in terms of action. A recent media statistic highlighted this. It found that cake was mentioned 10 times as often as climate change in UK TV programmes in 2020. This was actual research. Scotch egg received double the mentions than biodiversity on our national TV. Banana bread beat wind power in 2020 and solar power put together. But that's up until really recently. And I imagine the Great British Bake Off has got some serious responsibility in that. But thankfully, last November in 2022, you're probably all aware, we saw climate change move up the list a little bit and overtake cake in the media stakes. It was on mainstream news more than ever before, because we, of course, hosted COP26, which was the UN climate change conference of the parties, where 192 world leaders and their advisors convened in Glasgow to supposedly find solutions to this worsening crisis. It didn't quite fulfill its aims and created only some baby steps forward, when really we do need some giant leaps and some significant change. For instance, the aim of keeping 1.5 degrees alive hasn't really materialized yet, with the announcement at COP26 saying that we're on a trajectory to a 2.4 degree global warming, which is not a good statistic and good forecast. And we know that powerful countries are just moving too slowly, and they've actually made political decisions not to support major significant cuts in greenhouse gas emissions. But what can we do? What can we do about all this? And this is where recovery comes in. We've got to increase our ambition, and we've got to speed up carbon reduction. There's no doubt about that. Reduction in emissions is absolutely key. But alongside reducing our emissions, we can do something else. And that is we can bring back nature at an ambitious scale. We have to put our nature into recovery because it can absolutely help. One such target that we are suggesting alongside many other NGOs is 30 by 30, for instance. So that's where we get 30% of UK land and sea protected for nature by 2030. And we all need to be, we need all of our national policies to be contributing to nature restoration and not allow it to be degraded further. So this means affording better protection to the wild places we already have. So looking at our marine protected areas. So at sea, on land, we have lots of different protections, as you'll all be aware. We have obviously things like the Wildlife Trust nature reserves. We have National Trust land. We've got national parks. We've got national nature reserves, all these wonderful designations. And on land, they were designated a long, long time ago. We've only recently, in the last couple of decades, had marine protected areas at sea. And so we're quite far behind in doing that at sea, but we've started to do it. It's very positive we have started to do it. And we currently have 34% of Cornwall's inshore waters designated as marine protected areas, which you're probably all thinking, well, that's great. 34%, we're there. We've ticked our 30 by 30 box, but no, that isn't the case. Only 7% of those nature reserves at sea, those marine protected areas, are actually effectively managed. They actually have management plans. People actually know what's even in them, current data on what's in them, and have a plan on how they are going to manage them, and have enforcement in place to prevent damaging activities to protect the species and habitats that they've been designated for. It's really shocking if you think some of these MCZs were designated a decade ago, and we're still looking at that statistic. We also have to start looking at whole site protection. A lot of these marine protected areas were designated for really specific things. So I'll give you an example. In Southeast Cornwall, we have the special protected area for seabirds, some really fabulous grebes and northern divers. Great, really important species. We've got an SPA, a marine protected, a European designation, a type of marine protected area, right across from Falmouth all the way to St Austell Bay. it's just protected for those 4 birds. Nothing else, not the incredible seagrass that exists in that bay, not the merle beds, not the reason why those birds are there feeding on fish which depend on those habitats and the diverse ecology. We've just got it for the birds. We've got to kind of look away from these really species specific or feature specific designations and look at whole site protection, where these systems can properly recover. They can start to fulfill their potential as effective carbon stores. Nature cannot thrive in small isolated pockets. We've got to think bigger. I said this earlier, we've got to think more joined up, and we've got to think properly managed. And that is resulting in difficult decisions, but we've got to make those long-term commitments and ensure they're properly funded. So what needs to happen? Well, there's a lot of jargon around that. In addition to that 30 by 30, there's a lot of other jargon around, and some of you may have heard that jargon, things like nature-based solutions or nature recovery networks or 30 by 30 or rewilding or ocean recovery or blue carbon restoration. These are the buzzwords at the moment. All of those things essentially mean the same thing. That is giving nature space to recover and thrive and work effectively at what it does best to make our planet and climate function. So again, I will reiterate here that natural solutions are not a substitute for the need for rapid fossil fuel phase out and a reduction in emissions. I'll say that again, but they are significant and they can play a really important role and have other ecosystem services as well as their ability to tackle the climate crisis. But these natural climate solutions mean more than just planting trees. Trees are great, but we must look at natural solutions outside of the obvious planting trees. It has to involve the restoration recovery of a whole plethora of habitats and ecosystems at sea as well as on land. So what are those options for natural solutions on the coast and at sea? Well, we know that the ocean can absorb up to 35% of human man-made carbon dioxide every year. It's captured in the living tissues of plants and animals and incorporated into sediments, locking it away. That's extraordinary. Our ocean plays a really, really big part in trapping this carbon dioxide. On land, we have salt marsh. We have significant pieces of salt marsh in Cornwall, for instance, and salt marsh, like seagrass, can capture up to 2 tons of carbon per hectare per year, as well as providing, of course, a really important suite of ecosystem services, and plays a really important role, huge topic, in coastal and flood protection. Tick, 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 tick. This habitat, if we'd protected it and kept it there, we wouldn't probably have a large number of issues that we have nowadays. But over the last 100 odd years, we've obviously decimated quite a lot of salt marsh around our UK coastline, and we're seeing the results of that now. We've lost 80% of salt marsh in the last 200 years. That's quite astounding, isn't it? We do a really good job with that as humans. I'm sure you all heard us quoting the figure that seagrass, again, seagrass is talked about a lot. It's very trendy at the moment. It's a very unassuming grass that lives, an angiosperm. It's a true plant that lives underwater around our coastline. And in Cornwall, we've got some really significant beds of seagrass. In fact, we'll be doing a press release about the size of the seagrass in St Austell Bay very, very soon, so look out for that. But again, it provides an important suite of ecosystem services. When I say that, I mean things like it's a really important nursery ground for a lot of our economically important fish species, like bass, for instance. So, without seagrass, you don't have nursery grounds for sea bass. It's really important in coastal stabilisation and therefore flood protection. But again, we have lost a lot, about 92% of seagrass beds in the UK in the last century, and half of that has been since 1985. So in quite recent years that we've lost so much seagrass. Then we move offshore, and we haven't even touched upon the kind of deep sea seabed sediments. They are huge sinks for carbon, and if they are disturbed, which they can be through trawling and through other activities like dredging, you're resuspending carbon into the system, and that is a real problem. I also just really wanted to quickly bring up the oceanic blue carbon as well. This is the carbon stored in the biomass of marine creatures, as well as the carbon absorbed as a direct result of their activities. You know, all living things are made of carbon. The larger the animal, the more carbon they store. The longer the animal lives, the longer it's stored. You know, our great whales live for 100+ years, are full of carbon, and we need healthy populations. We need a thriving ecosystem with healthy populations of these big top marine predators, and to really tackle effectively natural sort of climate change. And I can't go into detail about that, it's a whole nother talk, but I do recommend you look up the whale pump or the green whale on the Whale and Dolphin Conservation website. It's really fascinating. So we must let nature help, and the Wildlife Trust have made a call to government. We have made, it's very specific, we found sort of very specific solutions that will help. We should be looking at implementing a ban on destructive bottom trawling of seabed in England. I'm really pleased to say the work on that has started. The MMO currently have a selection of sites under consultation to prevent bottom trawling in some of our marine conservation zones, which is a really good start, and they've got good targets in the next couple of years to meet, to ensure that that happens. As I said before, carbon is stored in the seafloor, it's in the muddy sediments, it's in the sandy sediments, which are mainly offshore. At the previous to the very recent MMO consultation, there were no trawling restrictions. The seabed was trawled, the carbon is released, and it makes its way into the atmosphere and contributes to climate change. It's still, until this consultation goes through, bottom trawling is allowed in 98% of our offshore marine protected areas that are designed to protect the seabed, and trawling was still going on. So we've got to keep up the pressure and respond to these consultations to ensure that we better manage this destructive fishing method. Number two is we need highly protected marine areas, and you may have heard about these as well because they've been in the press since around Christmas time. That's the whole site approach that I was talking about earlier, not just protecting a marine protected area for its feature. We look at the whole system. It's all important, it's all supporting each other. We need that system to be completely protected and to thrive, to really be at its greatest potential, to really see nature recovery. So we really need to be giving some of these sites, particularly these sites that have these important blue carbon habitats, like seagrass and merle, which is another slow growing seaweed that is a really important benthic habitat. They should all be given highly protected status, full stop. They're really important. Number three, we need to protect other key habitats. So we need to start investing and looking at other coastal habitats, investing in natural sea defences such as salt marsh to boost their carbon sequestration abilities, to act as natural flood protection. It makes sense. We're looking at beavers upstream, aren't we? A lot. We need to be looking at salt marsh downstream, and really we will see a really healthy system that will be very useful. And finally, we can all help. We can all help by local action and our choices. We can all do more to raise awareness of the consequences and the actions and encourage positive behaviour change. Everything from, even reducing the amount of plastic entering our seas would be really useful. And I've got some examples now of some of those things that you can do to take local actions. You can support initiatives like the Good Seafood Guide. We can all help our oceans by making well-informed decisions when choosing seafood, for instance. And the Wildlife Trust established the Cornwall Good Seafood Guide about 7-8 years ago, which provides clear and accurate information to help consumers and businesses make environmentally informed decisions when purchasing Cornish seafood. We have a superb website and app, and I really highly recommend you taking a look at that after tonight's meeting. We also, as a Wildlife Trust, work with fishers and look at their practices and their methods and help them look at ways of improving sustainability in their fishing, which is really great and important as well. And we really enjoy doing that. We can all play a role in collecting data. which may feel like a really detached way of tackling climate change compared to reducing the use of our car or switching to renewable energy. But actually, it's really important. We've got to have the evidence to show what is important, to track any changes, to highlight any problems. We cannot do anything without that evidence. And our government really do not, our government agencies do not have the resources to effectively do this. I've just been in a meeting today, actually, with Natural England, JNCC, about citizen science and its role in monitoring and assessing our natural capital in the UK. It was brilliant meeting and really positive. So we are looking at how we can help provide that information, and it ticks lots of boxes because it not only collects this essential evidence, but it involves people, it involves our communities, it involves people. Everybody understands then and gets what's on our doorstep, how brilliant it is, how important it is, and a part of the science behind conserving it. So we run a lot of citizen sciences projects you can get involved in, whether it's Shore Search, which looks at the intertidal zone, or Sea Search with the subtidal zone, or Seaquest for marine megafauna, the glamorous marine megafauna. But we have also been doing a lot of sort of more kind of obvious direct projects and action for climate change. We've been doing a lot of work on that trendy subject, seagrass. You may have seen articles about sort of seagrass restoration. There's a lot of work that's been happening over Plymouth Way with the Ocean Conservation Trust. But in July 2022, last year, we launched a new and exciting partnership with Sea Salt, the clothing company, Sea Salt Cornwall, to study and restore seagrass in the Fowl estuary. So it's a 3-year project. It aims to learn more about Cornwall's intertidal species. So there's 2 types of seagrass that we get in Cornwall, the kind of more subtidal Zostera marina, and the intertidal dwarf seagrass Noltai, by conducting on-site research, aerial surveys and water quality tests. So this is a really exciting project and it's getting a lot of coverage. And that's a whole nother talk. You know, Sophie Pipe, our project officer, does a fantastic talk about that. I've been involved in the last year working on some blue carbon work with Cornwall IFCA, the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authority, particularly in the St Austell Bay area. So there's been a big project in Cornwall since the G7 summit, which we hosted. And after that G7 summit, Natural England launched the G7 Legacy Project for Nature Recovery Programme, which is a really ambitious nature recovery project in mid-Cornwall, so the mid-Cornwall catchment. It's what's also known as the China clay country, because it's recognised for having high levels of deprivation, but also really high potential for nature recovery on former industrial landscapes. So it's been an amazing programme. Again, a whole nother talk could be given on that project. In regards to the sea in that project, we knew that St Austell Bay has these amazing blue carbon habitats, but that we know that we don't really know much about them. They're really undersurveyed, they're completely underprotected, they have no formal protection. So our project, the St Austell Bay Blue Carbon Mapping Project, looked to reverse this. And in the last year, we did some mapping in partnership with Cornwall IFCA. We did some dive surveys, as you can see there. That's one of the photos taken from one of the dives. That habitat in that photo on the bottom there is merle, which is that really slow growing red seaweed. I mentioned it briefly in an earlier slide, but it's a really special, very rare national habitat, and we've got it, big beds of it in Fowl and Helford and over in St Austell Bay. So very, very special part of the, of the marine environment in the UK. And what we've showed through that work is that St Austell Bay is supporting the largest seagrass bed in the county, but actually potentially the UK. But we know that more mapping work is needed around the UK. So we may be beaten, but for now, I like to use that statistic. That's a really positive piece of news. And we do actually have a whole evening dedicated to the St Austell Bay Mapping Project and seagrass and merle next Thursday the 30th. It's in person in St Austell, and the tickets are on Eventbrite. So if you Google blue carbon St Austell, you'll find it on Eventbrite, and it's a free event if anyone wanted to come along to that. And crucially, of course, we can all continue to add our voices and support the asks that we have and ensure that our government does step up and take the big action that we all need. Highly protected marine areas, you know, we're really pleased that we've had 3 designated. We need more. There's none in the southwest for a start. They're areas that will prevent damaging activities, that will support those important coastal ecosystems, that will protect those blue carbon habitats that we need to be recovering. So we need them. So please support them if you can. And I guess I'll finish with this lovely quote from Sir David Attenborough: "Together we can make the next chapter for wildlife a happier one. Join us to put nature into recovery." We all need nature, and nature needs us. Without it, there is absolutely no future. So let's not cop out on nature. We need to take urgent action now. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. That's a lot of information in half an hour.
Well, thank you so much, Abby. That was absolutely brilliant. And I've learned so much. I'm looking in the chat. I don't think we've got questions yet. So I'm going to ask the first one, which is, am I right in thinking they've just found seagrass in Mounts Bay that they didn't know was there before?
So they knew there was Mounts Bay, seagrass in Mounts Bay before. That's what the marine protected area, marine conservation zone. So there's lots of different marine protected areas. And I'm not sure what people are aware of in this. Some are European designations like SACs, which we have in Fallon Helford. Has everyone heard of the Fallon Helford SAC? That's a European designation. The St Austell, Falmouth to St Austell Bay SPA, Special Protected Areas, which is for seabirds. That's a European designation. We also have these UK designations that came about from the Marine and Coastal Access Act of 2009. They're called Marine Conservation Zones. So you may have heard of MCZs as well. So very confusing, I appreciate, and that's why we always just call them Marine Protected Areas broadly. The one in Mounts Bay is a Marine Conservation Zone. It was designated in the last decade, and it was designated, one of its features is seagrass. So Pippa, they knew seagrass was there, but the council, Cornwall Council, implemented some brilliant survey work and created a report which you can download off their website, which demonstrated it is much bigger than previously mapped, and they're now looking at ways in which they can manage that site to reduce pressures and protect that really important blue carbon habitat.
And is it at risk from these huge ships that wait in the bay until they can swing about on their anchor chains?
Not necessarily in Mounts Bay, because it's quite shallow. Seagrass only exists really within a 15-metre depth profile. It's a shallow habitat. So it is impacted in certain areas like Dorset, Studland Bay. It is impacted by anchoring from vessels, from recreational vessels. It is quite a big deal, particularly in places where there's loads of anchors going down, and it scours the seabed and it rips up the seagrass. But there's people, particularly the Ocean Conservation Trust, that are looking at really clever mooring systems that completely reduce that scouring effect. So people can still moor in these special places, but not cause an impact on the habitat. So when it comes to big ships, it's a bit shallow for those. What we have seen in Mounts Bay potentially is that you've got the ring netting, the sardine ring netting, which is an MSC fishery. So it means it's a well-regulated and environmentally friendly fishery, and one that we do support. But when they ring net in very shallow waters in Mounts Bay, which they do, we have footage of it and photographs, there's a potential that it could be scouring the seagrass in that shallow water. That's the only thing I can think of at the moment that we're sort of aware of. But we don't know exactly. Before you ever make any statements on it, we do some proper surveys to understand the situation, of course.
Well, thank you very much. And we have a question from Caroline. Asking, why is the rollout of HMPA so tentative? Is it being resisted by the fishing industry? And can we enforce it on international boats?
So HPMAs, are tricky. It's a it's a big leap in how we manage our seas in a short period of time. It would restrict a lot of activities, not recreational activities, but we're talking about activities that could damage and impact the ecosystem. So even potting could do that. You know, potting is a sustainable, quite in certain managed situations, is a sustainable fishing method, and yet those thousands of pots being dropped in a HPMA wouldn't be allowed because it could impact the seabed and where the pots are landing. So yeah, it's a big deal, and I get that. And so these HPMAs have to be designated in the right place, and they have to be supported by people, because otherwise they won't be successful. But then I do believe sometimes we're just going to, and England's tough. We're not a massive continent where we can designate HPMAs easily because no one goes there, no one lives there. In England, we're a really populated island, and we use our coast immensely, for all different industries. And so I do truly understand that designating HPMAs is tricky, but actually we've got to make some really brave decisions, because we need it. We need those sites in certain places. We need to do it.
Thank you very much. Derek, are you going to take over as host? Sorry,
I got served at the meeting. I'm not sure who did that to me. Thank you. I did get all your talk there, Abby. Can I just say on the highly protected marine areas, I'll find out a bit more about the work on that. But I think the government should take comfort in terms of the public commitment to it, because Mounts Bay has been done in the time I've been an MP, and that didn't really face any resistance at all, the marine conservation zone there. And the manacles, as you know, of the lizard is the most favoured one, and the massive support that gets from the community on the lizard is enormous. So I think the government would find the public are on side and supportive and would want us to go further. But we just need to learn, as we are with offshore wind and the issue of spatial squeeze, that we take everyone with us at the same time. That's really the lesson that we need to learn and have maybe learned. In terms of earthquakes, so let's see who else has got. Is there any more in the chat? The problem with the chat was that people were so concentrating on what Abby was saying, they didn't type in the. Does anyone want to put a hand up for a question?
Mary has a question. Did you want to ask your question, Mary?
Mary.
Oh, she's on mute.
Can you unmute, Mary?
That's it.
Better, isn't it? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
No, I'm in the WI, and I was just thinking about what our older members could do in terms of assisting. And I just wonder whether there were any projects or anything that we sort of unfit volunteers could do. I was looking recently at the Southwest Rivers Trust, and they have community science, citizen science initiatives, and that doesn't seem to involve a huge amount of fitness or skills. You just have to get a bucket of water and test it, which seemed to me like a really good way of engaging with a project. So I just wonder whether there's anything like that in the Wildlife Trust.
Yeah, we do lots of citizen science projects. So for instance, and I've got volunteers who do the water testing for West Country Rivers Trust for their CSI project. And you're right, she lives on the Foy in Polruan, and she goes out and tests the water for them. It's a brilliant project. We have Shore Search, which is the intertidal surveying, which can be a little slippery underfoot. It's not necessarily exhausting. It's not, physically exhausting, but you do have to be careful with balance on some rocky shores. Some are much more accessible. We also coordinate Seaquest, which is the land-based sea surveys, which are very, very popular. And we do training courses to train people to do these sea surveys and collect invaluable data about the big animals like dolphins, porpoises, whales, sharks, tuna, things like that around our coastline. So that's a fantastic one where you meet lots of brilliant people on the cliff and sit and enjoy that. We do that, not for everybody. We train volunteers to do our strandings, to record the dead animals that wash in. So it's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's absolutely fascinating. So we do a training course for that every year, and you can get involved in that. And that's just pottering down to your local beach and finding the animal that's been reported to us and taking measurements and photographs. So yeah, we have got, all of these different things. And then even the seagrass, you have to go across muddy estuaries, which isn't for everybody either. There's lots of options. So I would say have a look at our website and get an idea of some of the projects. If any of them jumped out, just get in touch and I can link you up.
Great.
Sorry, Pepper, I can't really help you because I was locked out, because I got kicked out of the meeting. I've got nothing but recent chat. Apologies.
Oh, well, Stephen's got a question. Would you like to ask your question, Stephen?
Yeah, sorry, my camera's not working at the moment, so I just have to put up with my mugshot. Yeah, it's I've just noticed it's popped up on my local news feed. Live map shows sewage being poured into sea at 16 Cornwall beaches today. It's the usual story, happens depressingly often. So I was wondering what the Wildlife Trust is doing with Southwest Water on this, and also whether there's anything we can do. I'm a Penzance Town Councillor, whether there's things that local organisations can do generally, either to lobby or actually to take proactive action with Southwest Water to try and sort out local issues in our particular areas.
So it's really interesting you should say that, Stephen, because I know we are right now developing a statement about our relationship with Southwest Water. Southwest Water fund our upstream thinking, which is our catchment projects, where we work with landowners, managers and farmers to improve water quality in the catchment. So they've done really great work on that with us. And, you know, ultimately we work with Southwest Water to find solutions. Our ex-chief exec, Carolyn, is now the director of natural resources at Southwest Water, so we have really close we've got a real, you know, inroad there to ensure that we can use their budgets and resources to improve the catchments and water systems in this county, and which obviously impacts both inland and out to sea. And I know because some of our members have been questioning that relationship, our trustees, our head of conservation trustees, are creating a statement to really lay out our relationship with them and how we are working with them to improve systems. I find with water quality is a really, really interesting one, because I live in Porthtowan and St Agnes, and obviously St Agnes Sewage Works is one of the most spectacular pieces of, you know, technology I've ever been walked around. You know, they've invested huge amounts of money to really improve the water processing systems for that particular catchment. But then there's also the issues with combined sewage overflows, and at particular times of rainfall that we get, you know, the issue of raw sewage pumping out onto our coastline, which is not ideal. And I know they need to invest in more infrastructure in certain areas of our coastline to prevent, where they can prevent that happening. Being a marine biologist, I know there are bigger issues than sewage going into our seas. You know, there are bigger problems with chemicals, pesticides, chemical pollutants used in developments. There's issues with dredging and the resuspension of these horrendous historic chemicals that are sitting stored in our estuary and offshore sediment systems. You know, there are other invisible chemical pollutants that, you know I sort of read about a bit more than the obvious sewage pollution. We also have a real problem in this county where, you know, there are events that happen that aren't necessarily linked to our sewage systems. So we get huge runoffs because of very poor land management, causing sedimentation and poor water quality, which then gets seen at the beach and pouring out into our coves. And everyone instantly thinks it's Southwest Water, when actually it's further upstream, and we're doing a really poor job of ensuring better land management around water catchment systems. So it's what I'm trying to say is a very complex subject, and one that you know, it probably requires a bit more thought for me to make a really comprehensive response to you. But that be assured that we do work with our partners at Surfers Against Sewage, who are very vocal and campaigning about water quality, and putting pressure on our water companies to do better in those catchments where sewage outflow is still a real problem. So we do support that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, it's not the best answer, Stephen. Sorry.
Well, just on that topic, I don't know if anybody's going to see the filming that Derek has arranged at the Savoy Cinema, 2 of the Cornwall Climate
yes.
Care films, but they're brilliant films. Down the Drain is very much on this topic, and I was having a conversation with Claire Wallerstein, and she says that runoff from dairy farms is hugely important in our river systems and in the sea, and a lot of the things that make surfers ill are E. coli so far. So as you just really, it is, but watch Down the Drain if you can, go and see the filming or yeah. Tim Cross, you have a question. Tim Cross?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, my question was about marine species distribution. So whether you've seen in your data records any indication of marine species changing their sort of ranges and distributions in Cornish waters, perhaps because of climate change, and if you had any examples of that.
Yes, absolutely, Tim. We see it on all levels, from sort of intertidal species up to marine megafauna. So, for instance, we see this little fish called a boarfish, or the grey triggerfish, which are the big kind of flat grey fish you see washed up on the beaches after a cold snap in the winter. They used to be really rare species. They're sort of a more southern species, Mediterranean species, and we now see them in abundance. And at certain times of the year, fishermen can bring up whole netfuls of these little shiny boarfish, the little orange boarfish. So we see it in things like that. We see it in the intertidal zone. There are certain species that again are acclimatized more to sort of warmer waters, and we kind of get them in Cornwall. Things like, oh, I'm trying to like a strawberry anemone or a snake locks anemone. I wish I had the photos to show you, but what we're seeing is them creeping further up north. The distribution is shifting, and then of course, really obviously, the recent, not the whales. I think that's actually a response to conservation efforts and whale populations increasing. But certainly in regards to common dolphins, we are seeing vast numbers regularly throughout the year on year. They're coming in because the sort of warmer water bait fish species like sardines are increasing in levels and populations of our coastline. So they're then coming in and feeding on all this lovely bait fish. So the species of bait fish has sort of shifted, and we're seeing therefore a knock-on effect of the top marine predators coming in and feeding on it. So yeah, you're seeing it all sort of trophic levels, which is really interesting. And in Cornwall, we're really like, we're not the extreme, we're not the cold extreme or the hot extreme, we're right in the middle. And so everything is just sort of shuffling along, and we're getting more of the warmer water stuff, and we may start seeing less of the cooler water stuff, but we're seeing
Abby, you've probably got a minute before you have to go, but we ought to get you back because there's loads more we could tackle. I've got, again, Pippa, have you got one last minute?
Jonathan, you have a question?
Yeah, a bit of a complicated one, probably. It's really a personal view, Abby. I thought it was great that you talked about sort of natural services or ecosystem services. I can't remember what words you used, and I think it's important that those things are recognised as services. But I wonder, do you think if we started putting financial values on them, do you think that would be a slippery slope to yet more problems in the future?
Yeah, there's some people that really don't like ecosystem services and the evaluation of our natural world because it should just be in itself, its value. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. And we do need to assign a value. And we cannot have another consultation where we look at designating a marine protected area in a stretch of coastline and we're giving these figures of fish, like how much the fishery costs. And yet we do not have any concrete figures of all the other ecosystem services that stretch of coastline provides. So actually, I think in the world we live in, it's just an essential process. And actually, there's a lot of work going on into ecosystem service valuation at the moment. So I think we will see more of it. And I think it has its place. It has its place alongside, what all the other functions that our natural world provide to us as people and our health and our well-being. So yes, in answer, I think it's inevitable. It's needed in the right situation, and it is a tool.
Thank you.
Thank you, Abby. We better let you go.
Oh, thank you.
But I'm sure we'll invite you back and some of your colleagues as well. Sorry, Deb.
I've got some great colleagues. There's other brilliant NGOs we work with, even people like Carolyn Cameron from Southwest Water. How interesting to get her to speak about, what Southwest Water are doing, to answer that question better, Stephen. And, there's lots of fantastic people that can access to talk more about the subject. You could go on and on. So thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it. It's great.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Abby. So Pippa, you very kindly mentioned the film that we're showing in Merlin Cinema, Savoy, on the 6th, isn't it? 6th of April.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll send details out to people about that. But also I think we'll get Abby back, or the Wildlife Trust. They do some brilliant work, and they're doing some really good work with schools as well. Just on these subjects. Anything else before we shoot off?
Well, just to go back to the point that Tim Cross was making about whether ecosystems are moving north, again, going back to Claire Wallerstein's films, the first one she made, which I think is called Under the Surface, quite a major part of it is the fact that the cold water plankton is moving north. The cold water plankton is really quite small. The warm water plankton is filling the space, and it's larger, so you would think that would be a good thing, but actually it's much less abundant. So that will affect things like numbers of basking sharks who come up. And really, this is just a puff for these films, because there's 6 of them now, there'll soon be 7, and they are brilliant.
Yeah. I mean, fishermen have been saying for years, for as long as I've been talking to them, that the warming up of the sea is changing what they're catching, and not so much then. It's not about the overfishing. There's obviously that happening as well, or has happened, but just the different types of species that it would never have caught previously because of the change in temperature and the way the fish is moving.
Now they have to persuade people to eat it.
Yeah, eat rather than export everything. Thanks very much, everybody. It's really good to see you. And Tim, sorry, as a parting shot to you, Stephen, I'd be interested to see where you got that data from. We had Environment Agency with us before the select committee last week, and we were talking, the whole thing was about sewage and Southwest, water companies, and we were looking at where the accurate data comes from, and he was very clear. He wasn't saying all data was wrong, but he was saying if you absolutely want accurate data about these storm overflows, you do need to go to the Environment Agency's site. And that was proven. I think Abby kind of touched on it. Last year we had a big, very, very high profile incident that happened at St Agnes, which actually was never sewage. It was mud running off the fields, which is equally a problem. You never get the mud back, and also there's all sorts of nutrients that are causing the harm that Abby's hinted at. Maybe that's a subject we should do next time, Pippa. The whole storm overflow and what's actually is being done to address that, because it's a very big public topic, but people generally don't feel the moving as quickly as we could or should. I think that's probably true, but it's certainly moving. Maybe that's what we should cover again. But I do need to shoot off.
Okay.
Any final? Did you want to close the meeting now? It's 5 to 6.
Can I just you go. Goodbye, Derek. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Take care. God bless you.
Is Alfie still there?
He is, yeah.
Yeah. Alfie, will you put the chat arrive with the recording, because there's lots of really interesting comments which weren't so much questions, but people might like to look at them.
Yeah, so it's a separate file, but I'll send it along with the recording just so it's there. And last time I put it in the YouTube chat,
Okay.
not chat, description, so people can see the question.
Okay, thank you.
Did you
Thank
get
you very
that?
much,
Sorry, that was
everyone.
my fault because I had my iPad on still. Brilliant. Thanks. Thank you. I'm going to shoot off. Take care.
Bye.
Cheers.